presentation. I would ask everyone to, if they have questions, to make note of those questions. And at the end of that time, we will we'll call on you to ask your questions. So Brianna, if you will begin.
Thank you, Sister Patricia. And Ruben, can I ask you to share the slides, or if you would like me to share my screen, whatever is easier. Thank you so much. I'm going to do my best to keep to the 10-minute window that Anna gave. There's a lot of immigration updates happening in the world. So I'm also going to leave you my contact information at the end so I can follow up with each of you and get you the answers to any questions you may have. But hello, thank you for your time today. I recently joined the American Immigration Council back in June. Before that, I was with the United States Hispanic Chamber for about 3 years. The American Immigration Council is based in Washington, D.C., and we recently merged with another nonprofit organization called New American Economy. We're a 501c3, but many people call us a think tank. Can you go to the next slide, Ruben? Our mission revolves around the fact that the United States urgently needs to modernize our immigration policy in a way that is humane, fair, and true to America's core values. As I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but America has a proud and complicated history as a nation of immigrants, and our current immigration system fails to live up to our highest values and ideals at huge cost to both immigrants and to our nation as a whole. Our current immigration policies deny immigrants basic due process rights. They put barriers in the face of innovation. They keep families separated and turn away those most in need of protection. Next slide, please. Thank you. We work through our various initiatives to advocate for change. We have an incredible policy team that works every day to unpack the latest immigration policy. They follow all the court hearings and try to simplify them for the general public. We run a blog called immigrationimpact.com, and I'll be sending you guys these notes afterwards as well, so you can follow our blog, where our policy experts weigh in on complicated immigration issues. We have a state and local team, which has coalitions in every single state, working with city governments, nonprofits, advocates, and others on the ground for grassroots immigration work. We have an incredible legal team that is focused on government transparency and access to counsel. So we spend a lot of time suing the government, as you can imagine, whether it's USCIS, whether it's Department of Homeland Security. We are constantly holding our government accountable for different legal actions regarding immigration. We do not have individual clients. We sue usually government agencies on behalf of other groups. We have a Center for Inclusion and Belonging that focuses on messaging and how to cross over into every community to teach best practices for welcoming and belonging for migrants, especially through neighborhood programs and ad campaigns in multiple languages. We also have a research team of many data scientists that are publishing new research every week and answering complex questions that we receive from groups like you guys, from nonprofits all over the country, from mayor's offices, governor's offices, questions about numbers for immigration, from Border Patrol, from DACA, maybe questions about how much immigrants are paying in taxes, anything that could help leverage new programs or new grants or answer as many questions as we can. Our team does that work at no cost, and we try to find the research that our partners need. Next slide, please. I'm going to try and sum this up as much as possible. There's so many other topics that are important right now in immigration, but here are a few of the buzzwords that I feel like you're seeing on the news the last few months. And so I just thought I'd give some quick updates. One is on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, DACA. A quick reminder that DACA was launched in 2012 under President Barack Obama. It is not a law. It is an executive order that was passed to lift young people who came to the United States as undocumented immigrants, as children, out of the shadows for deportation. The DACA program had a lot of success, but it is a messy program, for lack of a better word, because it is not a law passed by Congress. Any executive order has mandatory requirements, but it also means it can be overturned by other executive orders. So we are constantly pushing for Congress to pass a permanent solution to expand protection for dreamers, especially as litigation continues to affect the DACA program. Today in the United States, there are about 650,000 DACA recipients. These young adults applied when they were around college age, and now they're the average age of about 28 to 32. And in many ways, they're living in limbo day to day, waiting on different court cases and different appeal cases that are affecting their lives. 4 months ago, October 2022, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals made a ruling in an important case called the State of Texas v. USA, in which the Fifth Circuit found DACA to be an illegal program. Right now, that sent DACA back to a trial court in Texas that has a judge, Judge Hannon, that is traditionally been a very anti-immigrant, very aggressive, hostile court. So we are very worried about the future of DACA and encouraging Congress to pass a solution. One of the statements we put out, it's just one of my favorite ones, so I'm going to read this one. While today's decision provides a temporary reprieve to thousands of undocumented youth across the country, we should not be fooled. This case is headed back to Judge Hannon's court, where policies intended to protect immigrants from harsh enforcements have for years gone to die. DACA recipients across the nation work in our hospitals, they teach our children, manage our businesses, they contribute every day to the American fabric. Doing the right thing for them reflects the values that makes this country great. If we fail them, we fail our country. It's time for Congress to deliver. So that's just a sample of a lot of the messaging that we're constantly putting out right now. Senator Durbin just recently released a new DREAM Act. We've seen this version of the DREAM Act come several times and not ever have enough momentum to go into fruition, but we hope that this will be the time where we can see some permanent change. Jumping to the busing issue, a lot of you have seen in the news that migrants are being bused and put on planes from Texas and Florida to places like Martha's Vineyard, to Washington, D.C., to New York, to other sanctuary cities. Our legal team focuses a lot on transparency work. So we constantly use FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to try and obtain government records, as well as internal emails, text messages about various policies. So this is one that our team is very active in. We've already been able to obtain documents proving that these trips are costing millions, and proving where these funds are coming from, and trying to make legal arguments about the use of these funds being justified for these political stunts. There are also several lawsuits that we're part of, highlighting the confusion that busing and these trips are causing for migrants who are trying to maintain their status. As many of you may know, migrants are required to check in with an ICE office in a certain time frame, and a failure to appear to the ICE office results in them being immediately removed through deportation. However, they're receiving confusing paperwork from Department of Homeland Security. According to one lawyer representing a migrant, addresses are being listed as random homeless shelters. In some cases, those shelters weren't even open and the hours of operation weren't provided. These types of errors and confusing listings usually cause migrants to accidentally miss their appointments because they were not informed of it, or their mail is going to an address where the migrant is not at, for example, one of these shelters. So we're continuing to monitor these inhumane political stunts and advocate for due process. And we continue to remind everyone that seeking asylum at a port of entry is legal in the United States. And so by keeping people from accessing that, it's incredibly illegal. We're constantly trying to hold the government accountable. Another term that you guys may be very familiar with is Title 42. To keep it as brief as possible, in December 2018, the Trump administration created a new program called the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, which was referred to as the Remain in Mexico program. In 2019, that program was used to send nearly 70,000 migrants back to Mexico to await their hearings. Many of these migrants are not from Mexico, just to be clear. There's a lot of confusion when we say that. Before that, the program was temporarily suspended and terminated, but then in August 2021, a federal court in Texas ordered DHS to reinstate the migrant protections protocols. So in December of 2021, the Biden administration had to begin sending individuals back to Mexico again. All of this is related to a very obscure provision of US health law called Title 42. The Trump administration invoked Title 42 to conveniently achieve its long desired goal of shutting the border down to asylum seekers. Over 1.8 million expulsions have happened under Title 42. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but despite the claim that CDC made originally under the Trump administration that this was a public health order, many scientists and doctors have opposed Title 42 as a health policy, arguing that there's no public health rationale to support it. Many public health experts continue to argue that since we are internationally open to travelers in the United States, that there is no justification to turn away refugees and expel them to their home countries or to Mexico. In March of 2022, there was a DC Circuit Court of Appeals case that declared it unlawful to expel migrant families under Title 42. However, it is still happening, and we expect that we're still awaiting the future of Title 42, but we expect that it will be extended until May 11th of this year, along with the other pandemic protocols that are scheduled to end on May 11th. The United States Department of Justice has also asked the Supreme Court to toss out the case challenging the Biden administration's decision to end Title 42. So stay tuned there. There's a lot of very, very complicated pieces to this. Of course, something that's key to this is that many asylum seekers that are expelled back to their home countries are returning to the same countries which they are fleeing persecution. It's one of the main legal arguments our team makes. For instance, over 7,000 Haitians have been expelled back to Haiti since September 2019. After making that long journey here, it just doesn't make sense. Other asylum seekers have been expelled to southern Mexico, where the Mexican government then expels them to Guatemala in a process called chain expulsions. The United Nations has expressed concerns that this practice is a huge violation of international law. I wanted to touch a little bit on the asylum transit ban. So on January 5th, a few weeks ago, the Biden administration announced a series of policy changes, including an agreement with the Mexican government, which permits 30,000 Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, Cubans, and Haitians to be expelled to Mexico each month, accompanied by a new parole program for these 30,000 nationals. And that's 30,000 total. It's one of the top questions we get. The administration also announced its intention to publish a new rule, which would be a version of President Trump's former asylum transit ban. We are eagerly awaiting the details of this ban, possibly in the next week or two. Advocates are very concerned that it would be similar to the Trump administration ban, which means that asylum seekers would be punished for not seeking asylum in any other countries that they traveled through before entering the United States. It would disqualify them from seeking asylum here. It's important for you to know that in 2020, a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel blocked the Trump administration transit ban from being applied to thousands of asylum seekers who were being unlawfully prevented from accessing the U.S. asylum process. The American Immigration Council was also part of the Al Otro Lado versus Wolf class action lawsuit, which was a huge victory in 2021, where the court declared that the U.S. government's turnbacks of asylum seekers was declared unlawful. Specifically, the court concluded that turning back any asylum seekers violates the United States Administrative Procedure Act and Fifth Amendment due process clause. So we're continuing the fight on the asylum transit ban, and we've put out a lot of statements against it. And I'd love to end just talking about alternatives to detention. The council in 2017, we launched our immigration justice campaign. We recruit pro bono lawyers, pro bono interpreters, and mentors who are completely volunteer based and represent clients in detention, as well as supporting Afghan evacuees who are pursuing long-term status in the US. Just scrolling down a little bit here, part of our work is advocating for ending detention. The federal government has spent an estimated $333 billion on the agencies that carry out immigration enforcement. Currently, the number of Border Patrol officers is 84,000 in total. This is double the number of agents from 2003 to 2019. And this is triple the amount of ICE removal operators from 2003 to now. So we've just seen an insane amount of growth for enforcement agents. In 2019, ICE broke previous records by detaining more than 55,000 people. It cost the US about $126 to $182 per day to detain one person. So we are constantly advocating for a family case management model, which would provide migrants with wraparound social and legal services instead of a detention model. And we believe that this is more humane, more cost effective, and more in line with international standards. Next slide, last slide, Ruben. Here's my contact information. I will try to answer questions, but I can also connect with you after and find complicated policy questions from our policy team. But thank you.
Okay, now Lydia.
Great, and thanks for that, Brianna. It's interesting and terrifying all at the same time. And in that same vein, we'll move on to firearms. So I work with the ICCR's member-led gun safety group, and it's myself, Sister Judy Byron, and Laura Krause at Common Spirit Health, and Susanna, the communications director, is the staffer that works with us on that. And it's an interesting group because it's very small, as you can tell, and we've narrowed the focus of the work in the group kind of down to firearm manufacturers. And that's one of the reasons the group is small. A lot of people, probably y'all included, screen out weapons manufacturers from their accounts. So while I think the work that we've done at Smith & Wesson and Sturm Ruger is really and work that we're going to continue, I know we would all love to expand it to other areas, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the work that we've done over the past couple of years with this Smith & Wesson and Sturm Ruger has made quite a bit of progress, not with the companies themselves, but with other investors within those companies. So I won't even bother talking about the dialogues because they're most useless when they do happen. However, last year we did get a majority vote at Sturm Ruger, and Sturm Ruger is one of the oldest firearm manufacturers in the US, for those of you that don't know. They do main version of an AR-15 along with a bunch of pistols and different rifles, hunting rifles. So we submitted a proposal to do a human rights impact assessment. It was interesting because Ruger asserted in their opposition statement basically that human rights is sort of oppositional entirely to their business model, which is problematic. I don't know that you can operate as a business in the country and say you run counter to human rights, but they did. We got a 67% vote nonetheless. Ruger has not talked to us about it and has not implemented anything having to do with it. So we are planning to do a vote no directors this year on them for their lack of a response to a majority shareholder vote. Smith & Wesson, we've had similar conversations and some similar, we actually had almost the exact same proposal. It didn't get a majority, but it did get in the 40s, 45%, quite a large percentage as well. They are also not willing to implement anything without a majority vote. And even if they got a majority vote, I'm not sure they would. So holding firearm manufacturers accountable is going to be really important to us in the coming months and years. at the ICCR group to make sure that shareholder voices aren't ignored just on principle. Even if you don't think that Sturm Ruger should conduct a human rights impact assessment, you should think that they should listen to 67% of their shareholders. And then, of course, looking at it from a community perspective, whenever there's data out there about shootings, any kind of shooting, whether it's suicide by firearm, which is still the most common firearm deaths category there is, whether it's a homicide, what have you, or if it's a mass shooting, the only voices left out are the manufacturers of the products that killed people. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to add those voices to the table. They have, as of yet, been very reticent to do that for what are probably obvious reasons, but it's hard to imagine any meaningful solution without involving manufacturers. So that's kind of the baseline of those engagements. Expansion of those engagements would be really interesting with, say, companies that facilitate payments. So credit card companies, PayPal, that type of thing. These companies already have a system to flag specific purchases. Could, for instance, if they so chose, assign a number to firearm purchases. And then if that particular firearm is used in a crime, it would be much easier to trace it back. They are unwilling to do this so far. We've only had maybe 1 or 2 conversations. They haven't been long engagements, mostly because we just lack the capacity. The other non-firearm manufacturers, there's 2 other avenues we've looked into. One is shipping, so UPS and FedEx. Up until recently, it was perfectly legal to ship ghost guns to most states. There was a federal rule that got passed, thankfully, the Biden administration, an administrative rulemaking that made that most of that illegal anyway, so that regulation actually did what it was supposed to do and solve that problem for us. There are still insurance companies. For instance, if you're a company that sells products, you need to be insured. So there are insurance companies that insure firearm manufacturers. Most of those are not based in the US. Some of them are. I did research on this years ago, but it's changed. The landscape has changed, and I just haven't had the time to keep up with it. But if this is a topic you're interested in and you screen out weapons manufacturers, the companies that insure them and the companies that facilitate payment would be 2 avenues that we could certainly talk about pursuing. I'll really quickly sort of go over 2022. From the gun violence prevention world, it was a mixed bag. Lots of high-profile mass shootings, as has come to be the norm, unfortunately, in this country. Just yesterday, not only was it the anniversary of Marjory Stoneman Douglas, but obviously Michigan State had their own tragedy. So last year, there was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, if I remember the name correctly, and it was the first major or really piece of legislation period to address gun violence in 2 decades. It closed what's called the boyfriend loophole, which helps victims of domestic violence and abuse. It offered several funding streams for states to implement their own violence prevention programs at the hospital and the community level. And it required individuals who sell guns for profit to obtain a federal license. And there's a couple of other pieces. I think enhanced background checks people under the age of 21 as well. So it closed some loopholes, it strengthened some things. It did not do what a lot of people wanted it to do, which was restrict semi-automatic weapons. That was too heavy of a lift for this Congress, as it has been for many Congresses before it. But it was progress, and really important progress, especially in the domestic violence front. The boyfriend loophole has killed many women, quite frankly, over the last few decades. So that was very good news. Very bad news in the gun violence prevention world from a regulatory and legal perspective is I think I always pronounce this wrong, but the Bruin ruling, the Supreme Court ruling last year. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion. And in it, he held, and I promise I'm not making this up, he held, and I'll just quote it because I think it rings truer that way. To justify its regulation, the government may not simply posit that the regulation promotes an important interest. Rather, the government must demonstrate that the regulation is consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. Now, what that means is if it didn't exist in the 18th century, it can't exist now. So, for instance, that boyfriend loophole we just talked about, forget the loophole. just going to let people shoot women because we didn't have laws about that in 18th century, because in the 18th century, women were property of their husband. Ironically, Clarence Thomas also would have been property of someone else, but he seems to overlook a lot of that. So that's problematic for a lot of reasons. We didn't have a lot of rules and a lot of laws that we have now, especially as they pertain to firearm regulation and a lot of other things. So if we are now only going to write laws that the 18th century senators would have passed, it's a really short list. It's basically nothing. So how that's going to play out on a state level remains to be seen. There's already a lot of gnashing of teeth about how to interpret this particular law, but I think we can safely say that it won't be anything good. The data for 2021 actually just came out. I know we're in 2023, but this data, like all CDC gathered data to process and clean up. What we know about 2021 was it did have the most mass shootings of any year. Firearm suicide deaths increased by, I think, close to 9%, as did firearm homicide deaths. So, the data was bad all around. Supreme Court ruling was awful. And then the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was a really positive step forward. So a bit of a mixed bag from a regulatory perspective. Happy to answer any questions.
We'll keep on moving and we'll come back and have all the questions presented at one time. Okay, now Sister Susan.
Oh, yes, there's so much to discuss just about those two. I just made a few slides. Anna just asked me to talk about some of the companies and the different things that, like overall. So I just picked a few because there's so much that we could talk about, and each thing that I mentioned, we could spend the 10 minutes on that. So Ruben, could we get up the slides, please? So we don't have the proxy book today, but it will be published tomorrow. So we'll have more information tomorrow on the, all of the different types of resolutions and the numbers. Next slide, please. Then next, we are operating under the 2020 new SEC rules, and that also affects the votes. And we always are publishing that with our minutes so that everybody's aware of what's going on. And the federal judge overseeing that lawsuit that ICCR, As You Sow, and Jim Ritchie filed on behalf of all of us, challenging these rules, has set a February 23rd date to rule. Now, this was the fourth extension of the case. That's why I say it that way. We don't know whether we will actually get the final rules from him very soon or not. And so then on some of the different companies that we talked to, we've been continuing to file and talk with the pharmaceutical companies about their policies around COVID, the vaccines, what's next, whether they took money from the government. And as Brianna said, the federal health pandemic emergency will end on May 11th. And so we're studying what is this going to mean on many fronts, not just the health front, which will include shots and tests, the vaccines, but also, as she mentioned, the immigration policies. So it's a biggie, and there's a lot of technicality to it. So you'll be hearing more from that on that as we understand it better. So next slide, please. I just wanted to mention McDonald's. We're 9 years in on this engagement, and we're still speaking with the company about medically important antibiotics in the supply chain. So they have eliminated the antibiotics that we humans use in the chicken supply chain. And now we're working on the beef and pork supply chain. And the company released an updated policy in late December. And those groups that own McDonald's have filed a resolution challenging the direction that the company took. We just feel like it was a step backwards from where they were. So we continue to talk with them. We've had several meetings with them, and we actually ended up in April of last year having to write a letter to the board of directors because it just seemed like they were never meeting with us and telling us what they were planning. And another example of one of the ways that ICCR has kind of changed some of the things that they are working on is the Denny's resolution. It's one of a number that were filed with companies asking about their policies about sick leave for their employees. And as you know, if you took the PPP funds during COVID, from the government, there were policies that had to be followed. Well, now that plan is over, so we're asking these companies about what they are doing at this present time. And so like Denny's and McDonald's argue with us because they say they have limited ability to implement these types of policies because of the franchise model. They say they only, like Denny's tells us they only own, I think it's like 67 of the Denny's across, the United States. So we go back and forth about what does that mean? If you have that title, the title of your company, and then what policies can be looked at across the board. So, and the last slide that I have, Ruben, we'll just move to that one. Then Walmart announced recently that they will raise the minimum pay per hour to $14 in March for 350,000 workers. I would just ask you, if you know people that work at Walmart, to ask them if they would share with you whether their wages, the starting wage is $14 an hour or not. Many of us know people that are working there, and even when they raised it like to the $12, and that some workers were not getting that wage. So we've talked to them about wages, I guess, for 2 decades or more. So, and there is several resolutions with Walmart this year. Their annual meeting is usually in June. And then I just wanted to report on Exxon and Chevron. I mean, Exxon earned nearly $56 billion in profit last year, the biggest annual profit any Western oil company has ever seen, and that was from NPR. And the company has also ended its partnership with an algae research project at the Colorado School of Mines. It says, at this point, we have other programs that are ready for deployment, this person. They have been working on this program. I know I went to their annual meeting in 2010, and they had up a slide about like algae and trying to use algae to work with, I don't know whether it's like eating carbon dioxide or somehow working with carbon dioxide to lessen carbon dioxide. And the company for the whole next year would not even acknowledge that slide, because at every meeting I asked if I could get a copy of that slide, because when we went into the annual meeting, we had to give up our phones, so you couldn't take pictures or make phone calls. So anyway, so now they're this many years later, they're giving up on that project. So, and then Chevron, I'll just add also that Christian Brothers Investment Services were meeting with Exxon this morning. A number of us co-filed the resolution with them, asking them about, it's a whole thing that CBIS developed on report on the impact of the energy transition on asset retirement obligations. So their assets that they're going to have to retire over the next number of decades. So on to Chevron. Chevron set its own record with $35 billion in profit and announced $75 billion stock buyback and a dividend boost. And this buyback plan follows a $25 billion plan enacted in 2019. So now they're going to terminate that and then work on the $75 billion. And anyway, I could talk a lot about these repurchased shares, because they want less shares on the market so that the price will go up and they don't have to pay dividends to those shareholders because they got the shares back. And if you remember, the current president mentioned like a tax on buybacks of shares and during the State of the Union the other night. And of course, it gets a lot of blowback because the companies don't like that idea, because so many of them are doing this. So I'll stop there so we have time to talk about all of the the presentations, because there is so much to talk about.
Okay, I would suggest if anybody has any questions, to just, I can't call on anyone because, oh, now I can. Since the gallery is limited to who I can see at one time, just ask questions. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sister Patricia, this is Anna. I'm going to jump in right here and just thank all three of you. It's just been so amazing. I feel like I'm reading the news every day. We all are, you know, all the emails, all the newsletters we get, every day. And yet I feel like I've learned more in this last 30 minutes, and so helpful to have you talking about what's actually happening and possible. It seems hopeless, but yet all the things that you've explained about, and Brianna, in the system, you know, in the immigration system, and what hope is there, you know, it's, you know, things are falling out. Really, things are dependent upon the courts. And Lydia, I mean, I've worked on too with the gun violence, gun safety violence, and it was really helpful just to have you review what we can do and how that might make an impact of sorts as investors. And of course, Susan, your great work for on behalf of all of us at McDonald's and Denny's and other companies, and Lydia, you as well, just gives me some hope too, that we continue to struggle with these issues, and they are indeed the most critical conversations of our time. So I just want to personally thank you all for being with us today. This will be shared with our larger community in the form of the recording and your slides too. So just so appreciate your time with us. And now I'll pass over for, I just want to ask one question of Lydia on the gun safety. I mean, when in the day I was on some dialogues with the retail sellers like Dick's, you know, the famous story, Dick's Sporting Goods, which actually decided not to sell firearms. And that's a small piece, but is there anything going on in that area at all?
So yeah, I don't think it's a small piece. I think it's when a place like Dick's Sporting Goods basically gets out of the firearm market, I think it sends a really important message. Walmart for a time, and Walmart has cut back on their firearm sales. They actually at one time took all of their ammunition out, but then very shortly after that brought some of it back. So I think talking to the retailers is also important. There's also distributors and wholesalers. Those are harder to find and not necessarily publicly traded. The retailers are probably the easiest to get to. You know, it's a question of resources, as with everything in this work. You know, if talking to Walmart or those types of companies that continue to sell firearms or at least ammunition is of interest to anyone here, I would certainly recommend you talk to those companies, because it's certainly worth it.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I appreciate your tactics going on with the manufacturers. So you present these human rights resolutions or whatever, and then go to the no vote if you know you don't get the response. So
yeah, we'll see what happens.
that's helpful.
Anyone else have any questions?
And Lydia, I think our sisters were the ones that led the resolution with Walmart. I think it was in 1994 or so that got them. And I don't know, they just said, okay, we're going to do it. I mean, we were just like shocked, you know, but then little by little, you know, they have gone back into, you know, at least some of the gun sales. So, but Brianna too, you know, with yours, I was thinking about, you know, the other day when we had the freeze and the courts could not be open, and, you know, people were on TV crying because that was their date to be in court. And then, you know, how are they going to get another date? And they've waited, you know, some people have waited years for that date.
Yes. we saw that one of the average processing times for one of the ICE centers was 714 days. It's just absurd, some of the backlogs that people are dealing with. I know that when that happens, we usually the lawyer associated with that case, if they have a lawyer, that's a big if, will try to expedite for that reschedule. But yes, we're hearing the same for Social Security disability hearings in Brian's line of work, when their dates are canceled because of weather and other things, and they too have been waiting for 2 or 3 years for their court date. So that continues to be an issue.
This Anna, for Brianna, I guess it's kind of a dumb question, but there is, well, I should know more about this sort of business, but is there any possibility of choosing the court, of moving the court? Some of these courts are so notorious. I mean, it's by, the courts are chosen based on districting, right? On the.
I believe there is not a way to change it because it depends on where the case was filed, and people are strategically filing in worse court systems, intentionally trying to get certain results. It's really unfortunate. And a lot of states are putting an intentional strategy around this. I would say Texas and Florida in particular. I think, Sister Cahill, did you have a question?
I did. I wanted to ask Susan, when you talk about the Walmart workers getting the $14 in March, there's 350,000 of them. Is that the total number of minimum wage people that they have?
No. Walmart employs about 1.5 million. And the way they said this press release is that they say that it's like the last 350,000. So that's why I'm asking you that if you know people, to ask that question. I mean, we don't want to expose anyone, to harm from the company, but if you can, ask and see if we can give them feedback then to say, in San Antonio, in Southeast San Antonio, or, to somehow say this, it would help us give more feedback to the company that that local stores are not doing this, or that they are doing this.
Yeah.
That I try to say it that way.
You wouldn't know like whether the local employee was included as one of the minimal of the 350,000,
Well, they're saying that now everyone, this is the last of the 1.5 million supposedly.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying it that way, and just
Okay.
asking for continued ways. When we were going over there and meeting in person, before the pandemic, we always tried to have at least 2 or 3 Walmart stories to tell as part of what we were telling the company. About what workers said about themselves, that it wasn't us making this up, but workers said, okay, in our area, the schedules are still very up and down. We don't know when we're supposed to work, the 2 weeks out or whatever, so that we could give them actual feedback. Because we don't want to put anyone at danger, in danger of being fired because they say they're not getting it. But we just want a way to let them know, yes or no, this is happening.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Listen, I have a niece that works for a Walmart in the Indianapolis area, and she had been there for a number of years. And when they put this into effect to raise the minimum wage and gave the lower paid employees, they didn't compensate the other employees, and that created some ill feelings as well. I mean, I know that's been a couple years ago, but I remember her, talking about it.
If there's any way you could double check with her, because that's another whole area of the country that we don't have a lot of information from, that would be very, very helpful.
I will try. I don't see her that often. I just happen to be in the area at the time, but I can check and see if I can find out more information from her. I'm sorry, y'all, I have to go. I have a previous engagement for 2 o'clock, so I will see you the next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Seal. Bye.
Hello, good afternoon. Sorry, I am very late.
No
I
problem.
missed
How are you?
the best, but I'm fine, thank you. Just my calendars are not in sync, so I am missing several appointments. I mean, anyway, my calendar is not in sync with my mobile. Something is happening. So I didn't get the reminder on time until I am in the office. So silly of me, but anyway, good to see you.
You too.
And please continue. I just wanted to say hi.
Are there any other questions for any of the three speakers?
I'm not sure if I'm coming through, am I, or I'm unmuted, but still I'm not sure that I'm being heard, am I?
You're low, but I can hear you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. This may be more of a practical question, but yesterday, the women's religious orders here in San Antonio had a meeting with the Archbishop. And one of the issues that came up was, it was a challenge really, that we need to be more public on many of our stances on many of these issues. And I was particularly interested in the gun violence one, and that came up quite a bit because I think considering the Uvalde situation so close to home here, it's very much to the forefront for many of us. So the issue that I see is that we probably need to start making some public statements. And I was wondering if, Lydia might be able to offer some help, that we would publish in as we would see appropriate here.
Sure.
That would bring, I'm just looking for a little bit of direction and help on that issue, if you're aware of,
Yeah.
because I felt there was a lot of support for us going more public on our stances on these issues.
So, and I will have this as I will say a blanket statement, sister, and then I will speak specifically to your question. All of you should say more words about all of it. The Sisters of Mercy, for whom I work, are wonderful women. They do not want to brag about what they do. I need them to brag more about what they do. I need all of you to brag about everything you do. It is very important. So to you specifically, the sisters do actually put out statements on several different things. And I know there have, I think, recently been some around some of the mass shooting incidents. So I can certainly find some of those and send them your way if you think that would be helpful.
I think it would. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, it would be, we would hope to do it as a combined group in this case. I know
Sure.
individual congregations do them, but there seemed to be enough support for us to do something, as we call ourselves, the Intercongregational Leadership Group of San Antonio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will look some of that up and send it to Anna, if that's okay, Anna.
Yeah.
That'd be great. And we could use that as well, I guess, in our updates, just informing people too. I think, as you said, we seem to be silent, but I think we're all just so appalled, words fail. So to have a really good statement, I think is really helpful for all of us. Thanks, Lydia, for volunteering to do that. It's a great question, sister.
I know for me, it was very eye-opening. Last night on the news, they were talking about, it was the 14th of February, and we've already had 67 mass shootings in the US since the 1st of January.
Yeah.
That was quite appalling. And I think it's the state representative from the Uvalde area that's trying to pass some legislation where if someone tries to purchase a certain amount of ammunition, that it gets placed in a database, or that they get stopped. But there's something about a certain amount of the purchase of a certain amount of ammunition, not so much the guns, but the ammunition.
Yep. Yeah, and that sometimes pops up, and then there's all the normal kind of insanity that goes around reasonable discussion of reasonable regulations. And you think back to when, and some states still do this, keep Sudafed locked up in the CVS because we can't have too much Sudafed, but we buy all the guns and ammunition you want.
Yep.
Yeah, it's on the, actually on the Express News today. They're filing 3 bills, on the gun control. So I think it's good to follow up, for the local news, especially, because from the Uvalde, mass shooting at the school. So I think it's a very important, it's a really, actually it's a scare lots of people right now. I just want the people I don't know how we can support the bill. So I just want people can show us how to support the bill. I don't know how.
Yeah, there should be local groups. There are national groups, the Giffords, the Brady Center for Gun Violence, Everytown, they'll all have, well, some of them will have local chapters, and if they don't, I promise you, I used to work for one of them. They all have presence in Texas. Texas is a state everybody works in. So there are people at the State House that would love to hear from you if you want to support those laws.
Good, that's good. Yeah, good to know. And actually, I'm so overwhelmed by all 3 topics. I mean, there's all every day's issue, and I'm really proud of our group, to address those kind of issue. And also, Bianca, I'm so glad you're back to San Antonio. So I just want to say that. But really, truly, we got to have some way to emphasize. I know it's emphasized for everybody, but from our group, how we can promote that issue, promote that agenda out from our group to at least our chapter, the South Texas chapter. So I don't know, I know it's a lot to do, maybe we should have a kind of brainstorming, from our group to express what our concerns are and how we can help them, and also how we can prevent them. So, but it's really a good topics. I have to thank every one of them.
And I think you've got a great idea there, Esther. I know, like, in the San Antonio area, but it's beyond that. The Interfaith Welcome Coalition that works on immigration, they're trying to get us organized by, like, where do we live? Where do we vote? Who is our person? And that type of thing. Of course, I know SRIC is beyond Texas. So, that would be a little bit bigger group in that sense, which would be good because a lot of these laws are national, or that too. And so some things could be coming through that. I know Brianna has been coming to that meeting the last few months with us as well. It's a very powerful, compassionate, caring, and determined group to work on immigration. But it's like Lydia too, like how can we use our power with whatever the issue is. And I mean, this gun violence, it seems like it's every day, and it does. You just want to turn the TV off.
Can I brainstorm? I was thinking, at our investments committee meeting, if we challenge the managers and tell them, I know we do not have assets that produce guns and etc. However, we could also challenge them and see how they advocate against gun production or things like kind of to provoke conversation, at least for now. And another activity, another influence that I think could be is let's say, bless you, if like I belong to this other group, Catholic Impact Investing, for impact investing, and they also have access to groups for specifically funds formed for social concerns. So I can also ask if they know a group that is specifically advocating or launching advocacy against guns production, or regulations new regulations, etc. And I don't know, maybe this is still a new field, I guess, but could be.
Well, and Sister Letty, it's exactly what Lydia was saying, is like most of our groups, don't own the gun stocks. We're blessed that a few groups within ICCR have been able to buy the stocks. Like when we asked the Benedictines in our coalition, nobody wanted to own the gun stocks. So as far as we know, none of the groups that we work with, none of those monasteries own the stocks. It doesn't mean that we're not interested and that we don't want to do something, but it's just that we aren't doing it as shareholders, which is our usual stance in other, like when we bought Moderna to try to be at the table, or whatever, that our sisters said, no, we can't buy those gun stocks.
Right. And I'll just reiterate, there are other companies, if you really want to get in this space, some of the insurance companies, some processors, some shippers, but there are other companies that touch this quite a lot. The retailers Anna mentioned. So there's definitely still work to be done. It's just we are a small group and are resource limited. But if someone here wants to come join us and lead an engagement with the credit card company or what have you, we'd be happy to support it.
Okay, again, thank you to our three speakers for being with us today. And we want to take a break now. Do we want to say a 10-minute break or 5-minute break?
I think 5 is better.
Okay, a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at, what time is it?